let's kick this off. Thank you, everyone, for showing up for the Code Jam. Usual way we proceed, I'll run through Reddit first. Then I have some notes about, obviously, kind of an interesting week. It looked like it was going to be sort of simple, and I'll talk about kind of how I complicated things, and we can jump into that. And then we can open it up for just kind of a general discussion. So starting with Reddit, this is by newest. Let me do a quick sort by vote. So kind of at the top, like rework the faction point system. It definitely needs something. There are so many other fish to fry at the moment. I think there are a lot of mechanical things the game needs. I've seen a lot. I've seen it raised quite frequently, like, hey, we need to do something with the faction point system, and I don't disagree, but in terms of the scale of issues that we have, like the faction point system is kind of at the bottom of the barrel. I don't think a big faction point system rework is going to be a huge compelling thing. And I also want it to be interesting. So I think fixing other systems will help educate all of us about what the faction point system really needs. Something, and then next one, something for Army of One and Super Commanders. This was actually something else that I wanted to bring up later in the discussion. It happened after, I think, the X Project's release was the rise of the Super Commander, and then they got nerfed into the ground, and then it was, well, who runs a Super Commander, because they're useless. I think there maybe is a middle ground there. I want to get into a deeper discussion about that later. That was just kind of bolting on League of Legends mechanics in a way, like these units that had all these special powers, and it didn't really fit well with the army fights that Dropshock Tiny Wars wanted to do. But I think there is something there that's compelling. It just might take us a bit more to find it. There was a question that was raised in chat today, or actually, well, this week, and it turned into a Reddit comment about changing the coordinate system. The Tiny Wars Dropshock coordinate system is based on HTML, how HTML thinks of positioning on pages. Top left is considered 0, 0, and then you move XY from there. Just for simplicity, I use that and surface that XY for the units, just so people could be able to call out coordinates. We could move to something more traditional, but all of the mechanics in the game work on that HTML system, so it'd probably have to be a system layered on top of that, so the underlying mechanics wouldn't change, because that would be a huge amount of code. So we can just kind of keep this floating as a suggestion and see what kind of feedback it gets.
Yeah, I saw how you set waypoint and such. It's up. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it can be a little bit easier to set waypoints and communicate your position. That's definitely a nice quality of life feature. Maybe adding that will relieve some of the confusion around the XY, but that feels like a suggestion we can kind of keep bringing up in Reddit and seeing what kind of legs it gets. There was a suggestion about self-salvaging, knowing whose unit you attempted to salvage when it self-salvaged. This is already in the game. It was a nice little quality of life thing. So now if you salvage a unit that had self-salvaged, the message will tell you whose it was. The next is a larger question around the repair fee with self-salvaging. That's going to be kind of the first thing I'm going to jump into later, because that's a larger discussion. So I'm going to just table that for right now. All right. And that covers all the ones I read in advance, so give me a second. I'll see if anything else jumps out at me at Reddit.
Oh, speaking of the waypoint system, because the waypoint only shows when you inspect information of the unit, and it's exactly just like a few 2 lines of information. You could actually, based on the planet side, just invert that. Would that just be like a, I think that would just be 2 or 3 line code fix, and you can like do it right now if that's something you want to do.
Wait, for what in the waypoint system?
So you know how the coordinate system, like how it's based on HTML. You said it earlier, right? But the thing that you don't actually have to rework that system, you just need to change the top layer display, and at the moment, that's only for very specific spot in the game, and you can easily just invert it that based on the planet. And like, if the planet is 300 by 300, you can just 300 minus the existing coordinate on the display, and that will change it to what you need.
Right. No, I'm not saying that it's the code change is minor. I'm saying that. I'm saying more that it's such a fundamental change to the game that everyone like we don't. This isn't a game with a lot of new players. Everybody who's been playing this game has been playing it for at least 10 years or has known about it for 10 years plus. So changing something that low level, I'm not comfortable just doing the quick tweak and pushing it out there. Like, I'd rather surface that comment on Reddit and see what kind of feedback it gets, and then post it as well. Because, yeah, to your point, the code change is simple, but it's the community change and it's the knowledge. It's everybody's knowledge about that.
Can someone explain to me what the actual issue is? Because if you invert it, all you're doing is flipping which quadrant you are in a Cartesian coordinate system. So right now you're in the bottom right quadrant of the Cartesian graph. If you invert it, all you're doing is moving to the upper left. But it's the same exact set of problems you would have, just inverted. So I don't know what the complaint is.
Yeah, I think that you've kind of hit the nail on the head. I think it's just it's some things for some people are difficult. They kind of, I don't say difficult, but it's confusing to them, and for other people it makes sense. So this may even just be something that's a toggle down the road once the code is really stabilized. But there's so much. This is also, let's just put this to bed. Absolutely, the map code is in such a bad place. I'm not comfortable making even the smallest change to it and pushing it out right now, because there's so much else that is just in pieces right now. And if I happen to push a piece of map code that's attached to all this in progress stuff, it's not going to be pretty. So let's just put that to the side right now.
So one thing on that, when you kind of select a waypoint, like a green box around it goes for like a couple seconds, would it be a quick fix to be even just toggle that to stay on? Because I find that's very helpful to orient like which way the coordinates are going. Because like the coordinates are backwards too. Like I don't use the HTML codes.
Sure. That's exactly the code that's in pieces right now, unfortunately. But I agree that's really helpful, and what I'm really digging into is mechanics that can make it easier for you guys to know when you move units, when you attack, you can see it. I mean, the game was really advanced in like 2005 in terms of like what you could do in a web page. It obviously is no longer in that place. So I'm trying to. The reason the map code is in pieces is because I'm trying to build for you guys a lot of features that we take for granted right now, in terms of like when we play games and tell things to do things and we get that feedback. That's why the map code is in pieces. So unfortunately, like that's in the JavaScript that is like 75% rewritten and just an absolute train wreck right now. That kind of covers it for Reddit. There are kind of some larger things. There's a question about Hadaes. Hadaes was removed for Aldus, and we had the whole the PvE raid, mini raid put in that I want to talk about in a little bit. So I'm going to jump over to my notes and kind of start with the self-salvage that went in on I believe it was Monday. We talked about it during the last Code Jam Saturday. What's the overall feeling on self-salvage? Is it working? Is it not working? What do you guys think?
It works when you lose. It works when you can't salvage. If you're able to salvage, it kind of is an inconvenience. Like the ability to salvage it is cheaper than your cost to revive it.
Okay, so and that's that's the cost gets right. There were even posts about that, like why is the cost 2 times build order? And I definitely don't want self-salvage. So old auto salvage was basically a get out of jail free card. You got the entire unit back, free and clear, ready to use. But you also had to build the unit in a very specific way and maybe not cripple it, but hamstring it in order to get the most out of auto salvage. The thing that, and we had a huge discussion about this last week, so I don't want to retread over it, but it was some kind of feature like that I feel was needed and is needed for the game, because when someone loses and they lose everything, you quit. Like, any game that's going to disrespect your time that much is, in my mind, not a game worth playing. At the same time, when you win a battle, there should be spoils of war. I don't think the spoils of war should be the other person's entire army, but I think giving them some percentage of the units that you killed is reasonable. And on top of that, both players get to decide what percentage of their armies they want to risk. You are in full control over your self-salvage numbers. And so you can decide, like, okay, I really want to min-max my units and have them do a lot of damage. I'm willing to take a lower self-salvage percentage to do that. And then also with Aldus and the new PvE changes and fighting a bunch of Sha'Kahr queens, you can say, well, and people should be saying, like, okay, nobody's been to this planet. People are getting absolutely blown up. Maybe I should drop with a lot of units with high self-salvage so I have some insurance, because I'm still tweaking the mechanics of that planet, and I want it to be a challenge. I want it to be difficult. I don't want it to just absolutely, gut punch you every time you go down there. But I want you to feel like, you had to sweat a little bit and work to get that cool reward of the new warped crews.
What do they do?
The question was, what do they do?
Yep.
Okay, so when you kill a queen, the fiction is it's kind of Edge of Tomorrow. Like, the queen sort of mind melds in its dying moment with the crew that killed it, in attempting to kind of kill the crew or affect it in some way. It just kind of links with its mind, and the queen dies. What it does to the crew is the crew's name then has warped attached to it, and its piloting and gunnery go from elite to corrupted, if they are elite. And so behind the scenes, those numbers are going. So our current skill system, from rookie to it's rookie, I think, experienced, veteran, elite, is 1, 2, 3, 4, and those represent levels. So corrupted is level 5. So there's no real benefit right now for piloting level 5. We can definitely put one in at some point, but gunnery level 5 is already wired into the game. So they're attacking at a whole extra gunnery level higher.
Frizz, just a quick bit of feedback on auto salvage. Would there be a way of visually identifying if a unit has self-salvaged versus just been destroyed? If it was just a shade of, I know we're not going to have a different mecha, like destroyed mecha, but maybe like a shade, so it's grey, or maybe like it's a different color, just because that could help us when salvaging, not to the enemy or to allies, but personally it could help us understand where we're gonna, I would move a Hermes or a scrapyard to a unit that's destroyed, but I would move maybe a Hermit and I'd mod salvage to save command if I knew it's self-salvaged. Is there a way of visually identifying that?
Absolutely, and I don't want to do it. And let me tell you why. It sets up salvage right now as sort of a lottery. Like, if you win a battle, the person you killed knows which units salvaged and which units self-salvaged and which units dropped on the field. You do not. So it becomes more of now it's kind of like a loot. It's a new loot chance for you. Like, you don't know of those 10 units which one's self-salvaged and which one's full salvaged.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was referring personally. So say, for example, use 10 units on Aldus today. I'll have to go through my combat log that takes 15 seconds to load to see what's self-salvaged. I really see it myself. Enemies or allies.
your personal units. That I think is something we could do. Yes. So definitely, there's going to need to be some backing code to that, and it also is going to have to go into the map viewer, which I can't make any changes to realistically right now. If you can throw that up as just a regular Reddit post so we can track it, once the map viewer code is in workable condition, I think that's a nice quality of life change.
Yeah, agreed. And just to confirm, I completely agree where you sit with enemies. They shouldn't know what's salvaged and what's destroyed, or self-salvaged and destroyed. I completely agree. It's just more of a, for my own sake, if I'm personally doing anything.
Okay, cool. Anyone else?
Yeah, with auto salvage. Sorry, I was need. My question was based on self salvage, and is it just like a roll of the dice every time it dies? So is it like, okay, your unit dies, it's 1 out of 10 or 20%, right? So you got to roll it, you get 1 or 2, you get it, and the other, if you get it, roll any of the other dice numbers, then you don't get it, right? Now, is that dependent on every unit that you lose, or is self-salvage dependent on every unit you lose as a whole, like as an account? So like, or on a deployment. So if I lose like 20 units, like eventually I'm going to, my self-salvage is 20%. I'm not using anything else, odds, any crews or whatever. I should at least 2 units from that 10 unit deployment. If I lose all 10. Does that make sense? Or can I just have a bad luck and lose them all? Is there any I guess, percentage protection case for that? Or is it just always a roll of the dice no matter what, and I could lose. I could just go on a bad luck run for 5 different deployments, never get any.
Yeah, currently, it's all RNG. So yeah, you can go on a bad RNG run, and we can definitely tweak that down the road once we sort of stabilize the system and like the numbers behind it. That obviously is going to take more tracking code and everything else, and risks breaking the system in some way. So because this marries so closely to auto salvage, it was pretty easy to implement. I felt more comfortable making these changes. But down the road, we could definitely move that around as necessary. But it's calculated per unit plus any advantages that you have at the commander level. So the baseline's 35%. Everybody gets that. So if your unit dies and there's absolutely no other bonuses, you have a 35% chance of it self-salvaging. AL1, I believe, is a 10% bonus. Preserver Escape Pod is 20%. There's another mod for 10%, 10% merits, and then you cap at 85%, and that's per unit. So every unit that checks it up to that cap, and then it rolls just for that unit on its death, and it determines if it self-salvages by that unit or not.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to encourage the gambler's fallacy, because just because you have a run of 10, it doesn't mean your next run is going to be any better. But given the way that the code is presently written, over the long run, you're going to average out to losing whatever percentage your auto salvage for those units are. So if you have 10 in a row that don't auto salvage, that doesn't mean that your next 10 are going to be better than the 35%, but over the long run, you would expect to perform better than that as you go back to the long-term mean rate, whatever it is for your units.
Yeah, and my thing of bringing it up is, one, just more understanding, because I think that's one thing that over the years of the game updating from super doesn't matter, just updating throughout time. The game is very complex, right? So there was times where things did stack, and then they stopped stacking, and so and they do stack now again on certain things when they do. So I think for myself, I'm like, okay, I want to ask this question because I'm not 100% sure on how all the system really works. It's less about personal loss. It's more about, I want everybody to use it, and everybody else is like, oh yeah, well, I totally thought it was that way, but it was less. Trying to figure that out somewhat for myself, X-wise, and sharing that.
Yeah, and as the comment was made, law of large numbers, over enough losses, you should see losses in the range of what you've targeted for personal self-salvage. The RNG production does open up being able to game the system, where you take a bunch of small losses and then you can deploy a massive super unit, and you know you're getting it back because your RNG protection is going to kick in. So we'll see how it goes. I really like it, especially I think it came in just in time for the new PvE planet. It solved a lot of problems for me, kind of trying to design challenges for all of you, knowing that you could protect yourself against loss if you chose to. Some people just dropped large armies against 5 Sha'Kahr queens and wondered why they got wiped out. And that's tricky because like I want to make something challenging at the same time. Like if you deploy to a planet with a giant army and it just gets absolutely face stomped, that's not a good feeling. And that was really back like 2000. Let's the early version of the game, 2005 to 2012, 13. When it was active, it was so hard to do meaningful PvE challenges because they fell into one of two camps. Either I was building sandcastles for you guys and just waiting for someone with a large army to walk in and stomp it all down, and it was no challenge at all, and they just took all the goodies. Sha'Kahr definitely. I mean, there was a big wow factor for Sha'Kahr, but basically that there was no way to make them challenging because otherwise you fell into the second camp, which was I created something that was so difficult that no matter what you dropped on it, you were going to get absolutely demolished. And it was pointless because why waste the time of building units and deploying them when I've created something that is untouchable? And whenever I try, and so I'd always try to find a middle ground. And the problem with finding that middle ground was whenever I found it, someone would just deploy with a larger army and I'd have to tune the numbers up. And eventually I had to tune the numbers up so high that I hit the other side where it was just absolutely face rolling everything that people were trying to deploy. So it was an impossible situation to solve for because losses were so final. Because when you lost stuff, that was it. You were out that time, you were out those units. It was just a big punch in the gut. So with self-salvage now, I think it creates a situation where you can mitigate your losses. So I can ramp up the challenge of something a bit more incrementally and push it to be in some ways slightly unfair, but meaningfully unfair. And I want to get to that too. I'm kind of rolling this into the Sha'Kahr Queen Planet, which is a later point, but it's kind of flowed there anyway. So I guess we can start talking about it. But I'm really happy seeing what Self-Salvage is able to do with PvE, because for me now, I feel like I've got so many more levers to make interesting PvE for you guys, which really excites me because PvP is fun, but I really love a game that mixes PvP and PvE and makes both compelling and interesting. And I felt like Dropshock always had the ability to do that, but it was hamstrung in so many different ways. And now with a couple of these changes, I really feel like it does open up the ability to do compelling PvE and mix it in with the PvP.
Yeah, I think Aldus is in a good spot. Like, I got my ass stomped a couple times with a bunch of gats that are pretty easily accessible for most mid-level entry players. And it's, the match was probably 50-50. My last one, just with, like, dropping gats. But if you spend the time, like Slayer's got a shit ton of tuned units, and he's getting a lot better success rate than my cheaper units, which seems to kind of balance out the time put in versus what you're getting out of it.
Yeah, and just to touch on that as well, as everyone knows, not just limited to, but Dog and I have been kind of trialing out Aldus in a grind metric, and the reward you get if you miss one tuned unit, you make a net loss for about 1.5 drops. So it balances out. Obviously, you see the kill board and you see us going through a lot, but all it takes is one loss, and we do sustain losses. I haven't had a drop where I haven't physically had a destroyed unit. So then you're rolling the dice on the self-salvage, and then if it's overkilled by a howler, they love to jump on top, and the overkill's through the roof. But I really like it. I think it's cool. My without going back to our old system, my only kind of quick feedback would be you can be super creative with the amount of CE you can drop. So I don't want to suggest any changes yet, but I'm just Frizz. I guess my question would be, if if your plan for the Shak mods is whatever it is, and you don't have to share that, the volume that's coming into the game at the moment, if it is still meant to be a rare trinket, then we need to maybe look at that. But if it's going to be a prereq for a build, or it's going to be something interesting with the unknown, and you want it to be in the thousands in the game, then that's fine. So I guess kind of without you giving away the long-term story, is there a plan? Should the Shak mods be en masse in game, or should they still be kind of a bit rare?
I think the problem is people have been accumulating these mods for years, and so if I was suddenly to change the rarity, that then creates an unfair situation for everyone who hasn't been accumulating them. And so then I would get in the situation, well, we have to like decrease everybody's mods who has it already, and what's a fair amount. The conversation gets really, really complicated. I'm going to leave it as is for right now. The current mechanics have just been in there for so long, and then just sort of see what's compelling, and then try to build a system. You know, if we find something that works, build a system that hopefully works with the current numbers. It might need some initial scaling because, like you said, people have thousands of these. Well, some people do. So it's that the being able to Aldus was really, when did it come out, on Wednesday or Thursday? Was me. Someone had made a comment about Xetis on the on Reddit, and I was thinking, you know what? There's nothing to Xetis. Like, the planet was still there, and it was boring, and I hadn't really seen anybody deploy to it. There were some people that kind of liked it, but I think it was more a faction point gathering planet. And there were so many of these planets that were just different cuts of gathering faction points. And honestly, I don't really feel like that's very compelling. I don't think anybody's going to wake up or go to sleep going like, wow, I played Drop Shock, and man, I got 100,000 faction points, and that's so exciting. I mean, you know, there are a couple of rare people that do. I think the ones that felt that are still playing the game. But in general, that doesn't sound exciting to me. So I swapped the planet out, and then just sort of looked at it and was like, well, what can I throw in there that would be interesting? And I looked at how fun, and somebody was complaining about how we're not seeing any Sha'Kahr spawning on Dominus right now, and the swarm is down. So I was like, oh, let me throw together a quick PvE encounter. And so, because we used to have we had the Shak Hunt planet. So I figured, let me just spin up a Shak Hunt planet really quick. And made it small, threw a queen on it, threw some spawning mechanics on it really quick. And with this new CE, so the other part that happened this week behind the scenes is I added a lot of logging. I added logging to aura mount, I added logging to kills, tiers, bandit eyes, deploys, bases. And so this week when I quote unquote fixed the mining surveyor, suddenly people were earning max int ore. That surfaced really, really quickly. And that didn't feel very great. That's what I get for trying to break things quickly. Luckily, it looks like I caught it before any major damage was done to the economy. But larger story, that logging really enabled a lot of interesting things to happen in the game, because now the game understands the size of the force you're deploying with and how successful you are with that force. And the cool thing was, now with this PvE planet, suddenly I had to solve for something that has plagued me for 15 years with this game. Like when I was actively developing it, and when I was thinking about it, after it drove me crazy, and I needed to just step away from everything. And that problem was, I really felt like I was constantly building sandcastles when it came to PvE content. Like I was just building something that somebody was going to drop 120 gats on and kick it over. And it didn't matter how cool or pretty or challenging I made it. Somebody was going to drop 120 gats on it and kill it. And so my PvE building really turned into, all right, how do I make this somewhat interesting for someone who's fighting it with 120 galloners? And that's not a fun way to build content. And it also means I'm building content for a very small population size, for a very small group of people in this game as well. And it was really frustrating to me. And I think that's what drove me to stop building PvE content. I think I started with the Sha'Kahr in their base, and that was really cool, and everyone was excited about that. And then people figured out how to attack the bases and knock them over. And so we had the Sha'Kahr units and the Queen, and that was really interesting. And that's where I really got into the problem of tuning, because there was just no good way to tune them with all this perma loss and with the ability to just mass drop on planets, and the code not really have any way to compensate for that. So everything some kind of just came together this week with auto salvage, with the need for a new planet, and with the logging that I had put in earlier in the week, just because I wanted to start tuning ore numbers. And when I wanted to be able to see really what people were doing when they deployed, so I threw a bunch of extra catches in there to really peek into how successful people are when they deploy and how much they deploy with. The offshoot of that was when I built the PvE planet, and the first time somebody dropped 120 Gatlingers, suddenly in the deploy log, it was like, oh, well, this guy just dropped like 120,000 CE. Why not have the game respond to that? So there are all these. There's this nice tight group of mechanics now on Aldus, and what they're looking at, and they're actually tied to Sha'Kahr responses. So the Sha'Kahr are going to respond in different ways based on what you do to the planet, and when you trigger them, you're going to see a message from them. And effectively, what I'm trying to set up the planet to do is a challenging, nearly fair to nearly unfair encounter based on how you come at it. If you aren't careful, if you don't coordinate, if you're haphazard with it, the game is going to stomp you. I have no qualms about that. If you're coordinating, if you're careful, if you're watching what the game is telling you, you can know when you get in trouble. And on top of that, you can work within that system to succeed, hopefully. The game's not going to make it easy on you, but if you try to go over the top on the game and just double down on a drop, the game is going to turn around and double drop it back on you. And I really like that, because it solves what I think was the most boring part. I think it solves what's a problem with the game, and that is you're fighting someone, you beat them, and what they do is they just go back into their army screen and they hit add to army for 100 Gatlingers, and they go right back to the planet and stomp your face, because you've taken whatever losses you've taken the first time fighting them, and they're coming at you fresh. And that doesn't feel good. That's you're snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. It's the exact opposite of an experience you want in a war game, or a game that where you're supposed to be focusing on tactics and strategy. So back to Aldus. I really don't want to get into the mechanics, but I think it's pretty clear if you pay attention to what the planet is telling you. There's a couple of different messages, and I'm just going to say all those messages are meaningful. And what the game is trying to do is keep you from coming in over the top on it. Does that make sense?
I get the intent behind your decision, but it's just the minor tuning things that is basically what's happening right now and why. It's like just earlier today, for example, just a simple use case, we had 4 people dropping. None of us really dropped too much, but we had a system going on. We coordinate, but then it's just spawn again and again and again, and it's kind of at that point, I get you don't want us to overdrop and try it, but then what kind of level of coordination can we do when, like, anywhere we walk, we spawn a lot more Shak? It's just the minor balance things that's not making it really, really fun right now.
Sure. But I understand the frustration there, but I kind of like it, and let me see if I can explain to you why. So the Sha'Kahr are only gonna the game is basically in a couple different states when it's running Aldus. There's sort of there's a grace period when the planet first spawns. and that the intent in that is to let you kind of get down there, get somewhat set up, and get ready for everything that's going to be thrown at you. So the intent is not to be unfair out of the gate. I currently have a little grace window in there. So if you hit the planet right off of horizon, you do have a little bit of room to work with before the game, all the other mechanics kick in. So once the mechanics start kicking in, what the game is looking at is what are the forces that are arrayed against it, and how am I going to respond to those forces? And so the game, and everything happens on a turn, right? The game doesn't do anything mid-turn. So turn happens, the game is out of its grace period, and it says, all right, what's on the planet? Okay, let me build a force and prep it to attack, and it does that. Now, once the game has done that, it moves to a second state. That second state is, okay, how are the players responding to me? Now, if you're choosing to let's call it battle honorably, to fight as is, the game is going to maintain a steady state. If you choose to ramp up the encounter, be that with additional people or reinforcements or something like that, then the game is going to respond in kind. So does that make sense? I obviously don't want to give too much away, but I understand, like, some people have figured this out already and are doing really well at it, and then I've seen other people just get absolutely face rolled, and I'm watching the mechanics kick in, and I'm happy with that because the mechanics are doing what they're supposed to be doing. But I also understand the absolute frustration there because, you know, the old approach to drop shock tiny wars was, oh, there's a big encounter, let me drop 120 units on it, done. That doesn't work anymore, at least for this encounter, and for me, that's intentional. Does anybody have any feedback to that? I see Zoidberg put it. Zoidberg, do you not have a mic? Should I try to read your comments out of the chat?
Yeah, I like you messing with us trying to mess with the game. Finding clever workarounds to the game mechanics is fun and all, but that just, I feel, puts you in a point of having to squash that workaround at the expense of players who are still figuring it out.
Yeah,
I personally like it because it I mean, no, I'm not a person that's down there doing these things right now. It makes people change. It forces people to change and to think differently, and that's what units are doing right now. That's what a lot of things are doing. Force to change, of course, you know, units and whatever, but it's forcing people to think differently, other than just, like you said, break the mechanics of the game, and doesn't matter what you do against me, I'll just throw all of my might and my clicking at you. It doesn't matter. So personally, I like testing people doing that, and even if there's a hump, maybe that's discouraging, is they just don't know that there's a hump. They just think that don't know that the mechanics, right? They just think well, this is just me getting trash, and it's always going to be. There isn't a way around that.
Yeah, and that was exactly I'm seeing feedback that I was seeing kind of when I first brought out Sha'Kahr Queens, that, oh, they're too hard, this is impossible, I'm just losing all my stuff. But now I actually have levers. Like, I'm not bringing out the queens. I'm not, like, causing these spawns to happen. Like, this is the code responding to you guys, responding to what the Sha'Kahr are doing. And I'm really excited about that loop because, like, the game is fighting back. Like, it used to be during, like, a queen battle, I would try to, like, move stuff around or do little tweaks to try to manage the difficulty while people were playing. I don't think I've touched it in like 48 hours or so. I just kind of set some limits for triggers and then sort of step back, watch that, and tune them a little bit. And I really like where they're at right now. We'll see where it goes. But I'm encouraged to hear the feedback, and that I definitely understand frustration because, yeah, it used to be that there was no option. Like, if you deployed all your forces and you got killed, you're like, well, what do I do? There's nothing I can do. I threw everything I had at this, and it stopped me. But this is such a shift in mindset. Like, it's no longer, and it really feeds into what we talked about 2 weeks ago when we went into CE limits instead of unit limits, like getting into that finesse of what is your army composition and what are the forces you're bringing, and making that meaningful instead of just I have 120 units, I'm going to bring 120 of my biggest units. Getting into that direction of making army composition matter and making the choice of what units you're going to bring matter. This planet, the way I try to build these mechanics, absolutely play to that. It's so much more about the quality than the quantity, and I think that gets into points that Ramrod raised during, the first code jam. Like, hey, what's happening for the people that can't deploy large armies? And this feels like another great incremental movement in that direction. Is meaningful mechanics that to the point that embrace quality over quantity.
Now, is the Harb shooting at 18 range intentional?
They were buffed. They were given energy. Let me check the range on them really quick.
18, my friend. That's a little bit spicy.
The Harbs were given. I got it here. Okay, so there was a request, and I really loved it, and it was something I wanted to do with the Harbs anyway. And I think I brought it up in last week's code jam or the jam before that. I was like, hey, you guys, how would you feel about the Harbs having a speed down attack that had range to it? And so the regular attacks, their AoE EMP attacks, those aren't changed, but they were given They were given 2 extra attacks of Energy Web, and yes, those shoot out to 20, but they're low damage. But they do on hit, you get -1 controlled speed or -1 max speed. And the idea there is to just make it slightly more difficult to kite them, because the kiting unit then risks getting hit by this attack, and then getting slowed down, and then getting stomped on, and then getting swallowed up by the swarm. Dog saying the damage is a little too high. The current damage on that attack is 8 damage per missile. Is that feeling a little too much right now?
I would say because of the raw number, that's like 40% of a Shak normal missile before the AEMP, and in a lot of cases we anticipate the AEMP, so is a little bit high.
Okay, we can take it down. That attack is really meant to slow more than it's meant to do damage. It's probably also, I believe we added a damage bonus to missiles at max range, so that may also be kicking in where they're getting a little bump because they're hitting you at max range. We could kick that down. I could have that for right now. Maybe kick that down from 8 to 4. I mean, it's something you guys are running units that have probably 200 shielding or something like that. Is 10 damage moving the needle on that?
It's because the AEMP normally wipe out the shield, and then we have to anticipate for that. That's where the 8 damage start looking really high from. Because with the AEMP, you lose all your shield, and then the next turn you are bombarded by not only every other attack, but you're also getting these extra damage that may kill your unit.
Okay. I guess we can take that down a little bit. I mean, it's nice that Harbs were already sort of like the threatening unit in in their arsenal. Maybe, I mean, it makes, the Harb is the missile unit, so shifting this attack to another unit would just confuse the matter. Okay, so let me kick the damage down to 4, because the intent of this attack really is more to slow you than to do actual damage. So we'll try it at 4 damage instead of 8.
I was going to say, if it's going to be like a status effect thing, it could, it'd be necessarily lower anyway, kind of like how our Mad Cannon was. It started out with damage and then it went down to 1 because it's really the effect that they're getting and giving instead of more of giving the damage type of thing.
That's a good point. Okay, let's do it at 1.
I mean, that would be my argument.
Okay. So it's down from 8 to 1. And yeah, the intent of that attack is really just if you have a unit that's trying to kite the swarm, if it gets a couple unlucky of these web missile hits, it's going to get absolutely chewed up. All right. Now there was I wanted to kind of ask a question about self-salvage.
Okay.
And it also, oh, go ahead.
That again, because we spent like the first half of this just talking.
Yeah, sorry, but there was something I didn't touch on, and that was possibly bumping up the self-salvage numbers on Army of One. So he's currently at 10%, and I had a thought of bumping that to 20%, and possibly even giving Task Force Commander a baseline of 10%. And the intent behind this would be to give Army of One players a bit more leeway when they're customizing their units. And because right now, to maximize self-salvage, you need Army of One, and then you need all the mods, and you need at least one of the merits, and you can kind of mix or match, but you're still kind of hamstrung into getting that 85%. If Army of One had 20%, now that suddenly opens up some modding ability for Army of One, and also means that I think their units can go toe-to-toe a little better with someone who's running Task Force Commander or maybe even Supreme General, because not only can they maximize that self-salvage chance, but they can also make their units a little more competitive too. So it sounds like people, let's get some feedback on both of those, Army of One and Army of One from 10% to 20% on self-salvage, and Task Force Commander getting a baseline 10%.
Could we have a week to think about that? I'm AO1, and I actually am not certainly enamored by that right off the bat. And I'm wondering if we could have a week to play with the mechanics a little bit more now that they've been put in the game, and then come back with our feedback.
Yeah, I can take that as.
I piss everyone else off. I just feel like we've just been dumped in the deep end with this new feature, and maybe we would like to be able to explore it a bit more.
That's now I'm 100% on board with that. My mentality is always move fast and break stuff. And I know when you're playing a game, that's got to be about as frustrating as you can get. I think that's probably the best and worst part of Drop Shock is so much stuff changes. That's really cool. And it's also so much stuff changes. This really sucks.
I think.
Anyone else have feedback?
So about the repair cost, I don't think we go over.
No, not yet. Just I want a quick round of feedback on buffing Army of One self-salvage and adding self-salvage to Task Force Commander. I just want to do a quick round on that, and then we can talk about repair costs. Actually, I think we did. Let's close this out.
Yeah, I like the idea of increasing it a bit, but I'm fine waiting. I don't see a problem waiting a week to play around with it more.
Okay. Is the consensus we'll sleep on this one a week and revisit?
Just wait. A lot has changed the past couple of days. Give us a chance to.
Oh yeah, no problem. I can stop changing stuff, guys. If that's the feedback I'm getting.
No, I'm liking the changes. Like I love the work fast and break stuff. Just a matter of not breaking too many things at once, I guess.
Yeah, break a little less.
Okay, I'll try. No promises on max int or though. We'll try to avoid that one in the future. All right, so let's icebox that for 1 week and let you guys play a little more with self-salvage and see how you feel. When I thought of it, the reason I like that buff is because I'm trying. It plays into a larger conversation of balancing Task Force Commander, Supreme General, and Army of One. And I see comments about, well, it doesn't make sense to have these as player choices. They really should be on planets. My issue with that is we tried that. We tried that for years and years and years, literally years. We built so many planets with so many different CE limits and so many different rules and sub rules. It's not. I think it's a non-starter. It didn't work. Like we ended up with 18 planets, and I think there was maybe one or two really compelling ones in the lot, and like they didn't. And like there was like Rin. Like Rin, I think is a really compelling planet, and it doesn't have. And it doesn't have all the CE bucketing and everything else. So I totally understand where that suggestion is coming from. Like, oh, just throw CE planets on limits and solve it. I think that's a false solution. It feels like a solution, just because it makes sense in a way, but we've done it, and I don't like where it leads us. It makes I want you guys to make meaningful choices in the game and really feel like this is my character. I've customized him. I've built him a certain way, and he's built that way because he plays the way I want to play. I think when game mechanics are able to marry up with personal choice, you invest in the game, and it's interesting and compelling, and it's something you think about. I think if those CE limits are just attached to planets, then it's just like loading a different map, and you just play the map because the map has what you want to do. We can revisit, but I'm going to die on the hill of I really think this needs to be player choice and something that you build into your character. And I know it's hard. It's super hard. I've tried to balance this for years, but I really feel like in order to make this game interesting, like this is a hard problem that needs to be solved. And I feel like the moves to CE limits instead of army limits and self-salvage and things like that are starting to reveal that maybe there is a way to do this. So I love the suggestion of sleep on it, but I just want to I want to touch on this idea of we'll just put the limits on planets and be done with it. I feel like we've done it, and I feel like it didn't work.
I agree. There's no reason to, like you said, you pick your niche planet and then you basically just force everybody to play your way with you when everybody has their own play style. So if planets are then set up to play your niche, you're just going to play on your niche planet and then everybody else is stuck playing with you or not playing on that planet.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we had 18, 20 planets plus arenas. The game just turned into roll your own planet. Like we could have the game literally was go make the planet for yourself and go play on it. And that was never what I wanted for this game. All right. I think we can close the door on that. Let's maybe quickly touch on mining ore tweaks. So when I put in the logging, it surfaced so much to me about how ore was coming, how you guys were getting ore and how it was balanced. And I really made it absolutely clear to me how broken it was. So I went in and I scrubbed all the ore code and I consolidated it. And then I tuned it so that, because I felt like building mining was in a really good place and I wanted the individual ore mining with vehicles to be competitive with that. So I tuned all those numbers up. And then looking at the logs, they're pretty much on par. And you can do both right now and bring home a truckload of ore, which I really like too, because it means you're managing not only your building mining operation, but you're also sending out individual miners to mine deposits as well. I don't know how many of you have really managed to dive into the new ore changes or even knew about them. Any feedback there?
I run 2D, so like I don't see any pictures, but I'm not sure if that has anything to do with it.
So I like everything. I don't know if you incorporated it or not. I don't even remember exactly who brought it up last night, but was setting each ore deposit type to have their own max, which I think you kind of do with the super deposits and megas, because I noticed some of them I could hit just over 10k buff on, and then others I could only get up to 10k. But I like the difference. I like the vehicular mining. I kind of spoke to you, I think, earlier today about it. We have to kind of bring it back somehow because mining bases are 4 times the amount of a good vehicular mining run. I think it's in a good place now. I would like to see the 2D images because I'm a 2D player too. So just the small tweak so that I know what I'm picking up, or if it's worth picking up, what I should be bringing to a processor versus mining with my vehicle. Maybe not making it. No, I think everything's good other than that. Yeah.
I also, so the mining surveyor acti now shows you, then this is so embarrassing. So the code was all laid out so that the moment you use that on the map, it would actually report back to you in the unit how much ore the deposit had on activation. And then when the turn processor code ran, then it would increase the amount of ore in there. Due to me being an idiot with the database, none of that worked. So once I made the smallest of database changes, all of that code started firing again. And of course, I was never checking a max limit for ore increases, and people were deploying with 100 drones and just taking a small deposit and turning it into 2 billion ore.
Well, in everybody's defense, it didn't work until you fixed it. And then when we noticed it was fixed, we went to see how broken it was.
It was absolutely, totally broken.
Just maybe 89 billion in one deposit was a little high.
Yeah, that was a bit much. Luckily, with the logging, suddenly seeing max int pop up, especially when I'm trying to get ready for sleep, that was not a fun moment. But I think I caught it before any real damage was done, and then had to just, oh god, that was not great. But at least it didn't totally destroy the economy in the process. So
I don't think any of us were going to be malicious. We all talked about it beforehand. I messaged a couple of people. I was like, I think we may have been added something broken here. Let's go find out. And sure enough.
One person did reach out to me, so I was a little nice. I was a little kinder with them when I was resetting ore amounts. For some people, luckily, I had another backup that I pulled from to get their amounts, and some people I just did some very rounded subtraction, not in their favor, to get their ore back to a somewhat reasonable level. But I didn't see anybody screaming at me the next day, so I guess it all worked out.
Nah, a couple 100,000 ore ain't no biggie.
Yeah, but especially now, one good mining run, and the base alone is getting you 400k, and vehicle mining can get you really close to that too. All right, I think we've talked about that quite a bit. I want to quickly touch on tuned units. It looks like Battle Axe 1's, that tuned unit has been kind of the most difficult one. That ability, minus damage on armor hit, has always been really powerful. It's always been something where I think I can tweak it a little bit more and make it, and maybe add a little more minus damage to armor. And every time I do, someone brings out a unit that's basically unkillable. And it's like, oh, well, that was stupid. And the BA1, the tuned BA1 exactly hit that spot. It was just way too much anti-armor damage, and also an extra anti-armor that you can put regular mods on top of. So I kicked its CE up, and I also just decreased the bonuses on that. And then I also reworked condensed neutronium ammo and explosive missiles so that they can ignore percent damage reduction. And then on top of that, the Sha'Kahr, some of their units also now have attacks that ignore percentage damage reduction. So hopefully with all of that, it no longer becomes, well, I just use battle axes on Sha'Kahr. I think that was Dog's. I think Dog inspired that change after watching 42 BA1s just absolutely stomp a massive army of Sha'Kahr.
Frizz, just a quick one regarding the Shak ignoring damage reduction. Does that work for example, the Behemoth's 25% or 75% reduction? Is that coded the same way, or is that different? Just because I've noticed that I think I already know the answer to confirm it, but I'm noticing that they're getting one tapped, and that could be on the assumption that some type of damage. But can you just confirm that?
The tuned Behemoth?
Yeah. So any Behemoth has a don't move. It can't move, but it only takes 25% of incoming damage. Would a Shak bypass that? Because I have noticed them dying, which is fine, and I think they should if they don't. But I just wanted to make sure that is happening.
I'd have to. It depends on what part of the code it's using to do that reduction. That was the Behemoth Heavy Tank, right?
Correct. Yeah, I just think that I can. It's the second. It's the one we use to back up with the BA1, just personally on Aldus, and I think 12. If you can micro those with Acti Master, you get a pretty good run of only you can use like 18 or 20 units. I'm just concerned that we might have another BA1 in a week, so I just wanted to kind of get that looked at under the umbrella now.
I'm just pulling it up.
Isn't there a limited number of actis though? Isn't it like 4 actis?
AFD Master just kind of rejuvenates it and gives you an extra one.
Every 10 turns, or you get one back. So
Yeah,
it's 4 charges, so you get 5 charges, and then in 10 turns after that, you'd have another charge. So I don't really think that's a broken aspect. If you're killing the entire swarm in 5 turns, there's maybe something else to look at.
Yeah, sorry, no, I wouldn't say it's broken. I'm just thinking more when you can repair 80 armor and then 25% whenever you're taking, so you can kind of bounce between those, and it gives you a good amount of turn of survivability, which is fine. That might be a strategy, and you've got to click a lot. But with all attack, because it's non-PvP, it just gives you a lot of time to kind of attack these.
Okay, I've got the code up. That actually is in a different block from the per attack damage modifiers. So the change to explosive missiles, condensed neutronium, and the Sha'Kahr were all to reductions that are for specific damage type: energy, ballistic, and missile. And that's the code block that they're modifying. There's other global damage in improvers and reducers, and that's a completely separate. That's a separate area of code, and that was, as far as I can tell, that was not touched by this change.
Cool, that's fine. That's cool. We can kind of feedback and see how it works. As PK said, maybe it's and as Dog said, because there's a lot of micro for them, the reward is having the unkillable, but it's only really unkillable for 5 turns. If you play it over a 10th turn. So yeah.
I mean, I would be opposed to reducing the behemoth's charges, down to like 2 or 3. I hate seeing them like jump on top of a PDS and ignore things. So I mean, I'm fine with reducing the charges for multiple reasons, but I don't think it's a super broken aspect.
I'm inclined to just leave it as it is right now. I don't feel like behemoths ever got their moment in Drop Shock. I always thought they were a really cool unit. They were probably like the 2nd or 3rd unit I ever designed for the game. So I'm honestly, if they're a little OP and people start bringing them out in numbers, cool. Like they deserve a time to shine. All right, so that was BA1s. I've got 2 extra items, and look at that, we like hit an hour on the nose. Perfect. So I think we can run a little bit over because these have been things that I've sort of seen reoccurring on Reddit and in chat, and I think they're worth a discussion. One, and this has been brought up for years and years and years, is hey, why don't we do a wipe or a reset in Drop Shock? Before I give my take on that, is there any feedback on wiping, resetting all or elements of the game?
I mean, I have quite obvious biases, so take that for what it is. I would rather us continue to focus on the kind of new content / in-game content that's been developed. I think right now, if we were to add a reset on top of that, we would go back to fighting the fights of the past rather than some of the cool stuff we're doing right now. I think it's interesting, nice to be at a point where we're no longer all so intrinsically motivated by a single point on a leaderboard. I'm glad that people have taken a step
I suppose that I'm not necessarily 100% opposed in perpetuity, but I would say it's not something I would be interested in seeing much anytime soon. You know, how much the content is being added right now is contributing to staying, versus what kind of effects that kind of reset could impose on the just my two.
I think if we created an area of so in terms of storage and commander record and kind of overall undeployed personal wealth as a broad term, I'd say that needs to stay because people have invested a lot of time in that, and their reward is they can kind of pick up the game as they go, like Leth, for example, and I would say I'm somewhere near that as well. You can kind of pick up and go. I think if we created a certain continual reset of a certain part of the game, that would be really good, and that kind of might address the issue, or not even the issue, but address the conversation. So a long-term conversation. I don't think this is the thing that we do, but it might spark another conversation. A long-term thing is faction point reset. Maybe there's something somewhere within factions that is continually reset, where there is a strategy that one or every 3 or every 6 months that gets looked at, where there can be a goal to work toward, because faction points have been layered throughout every planet, but we can all agree that most of the fighting now is done over salvage and bragging rights. So maybe we could position it where that does kind of scratch the itch a little bit in terms of this reset, this thing that you can keep grinding and have fun with while you don't lose your invested time. And I don't think faction points is that, or maybe it is, but I think it's there, but I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Okay. So
I mean, that's what I posted. So I mean, that's doesn't matter either way. I mean, I'm not gonna like have my own suggestions or anything like that because that's a little biased, right? But either way, that we need something to drive other than, okay, like you said, bragging rights and everything else, and that's what drove us before, right? Anybody wanted to be, if you weren't on top 5, you wanted to be on top 5. If you weren't there or you were there, you wanted to stay there, depending on what was going on. Most of the time, that's what happened, and that and organically made fights happen. It didn't just, there's a lot of content that's making the fights happen now, but organically that made fights, that made rivalries, that made friends, that made a lot of where we are. But right now that's non-existent, right? It's not useful to go for packs, that whole type of the game. Now reworking it as a whole different system and me talking about it, and I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not gonna talk about it any more than another minute, but there's a lot of things that need to be done for that, and it's not gonna. I feel like that's us to put a lot of energy to get things organically instead of having Frizz or us or the community itself have to bring new content to keep us engaged, for the foreseeable future.
Do you think there could be something like, sorry to jump in, I know I spoke a lot and I'm going to keep quiet after this one. Do you think there could be a way where there is a cachet, or for everyone that's kind of create Mind Unknown, you get a cachet payout? Could there be a cachet payout based on how many faction points are accumulated over a set period? So it's almost like a continual race. You can have, for the sake of legacy, have the top 5 factions, but could it be like this month, this faction earned X, and then there are, if you achieve 50,000 or more, you get this. So rather, it's not, it's not first player gets this, second player gets this, because the most successful usually then gets the bigger payment. But it could be maybe levels where there's a joint reward, something like that, and then that can inspire conflict across all these smaller planets that, or maybe the faction war planets that don't necessarily get seen.
Yeah, these are great. So we kind of veered into we veered from resets into faction points, which actually I think is brilliant. But let's start with like overall just games that wipe and that kind of reset you.
Can I put a point out before we do that, because I just kind of want to address it from my end also.
Well, go ahead.
So here's my thing, and I've kind of hashed it out with a few people. I think for the grand scheme of the game, if we ever do want to grow outside of our current base, either a second instance of the game or a wipe to some degree is in order. Personally, I think for the longevity of the game and growing the game, the best way to do it is to do kind of like Rebel Combine in UF, where you have one of every structs to start off with. There are no factions in the game. Everybody goes to UF and RC. There's one of every struct. You can create factions. When you do, you have the ability to spend faction points to buy each struct separately, whatever you want, based on the cost, based on the tier. Now you have a value for faction points. Now you have a long system of, hey, I'm going to build this faction. These are the units we find important. We're going to upgrade and get the structs for these units. Allows you to create a whole new ranking system. It doesn't have a 500,000 beacon difference between a new faction and an existing faction. You can reset these every 30, 90, whatever days. And it's not like a detrimental thing where, hey, I just lost $20,000 worth of structs. I know from personal experience how much structs cost. I've invested a lot. I think longevity-wise, a total reset is the best option. For at
I
least
think just making a legacy game.
I think for at least our current community, having a faction point reset or a new faction point system and converting what we have into some sort of legacy content is what we need at the minimum.
Yeah. So let's take this one at a time. So like a total player game reset, I think would kill what little of this community is left. I mean, it's really compelling. It's really exciting to see people come back and say, wow, like I haven't seen you guys in 10 years and get really excited and hey, here's all my stuff. It's just such an easy door for them to walk through. It's inviting. Everything that they put time into is still there and waiting for them. To take all of that away, I think we would lose the one little bit of momentum we have that's bringing people back. We aren't getting new signups. Let's just be absolutely blunt about that. We had one new guy sign up on Thursday. He deployed to a planet. He moved his commander to some supplies on the ground. He moved his salvager to an ore deposit, and then he quit. There's just not, I don't blame him. There's not a lot going on. The game doesn't do a lot to give you something next and to set up interesting challenges for you. It's a game from 15 years ago. It really punishes players, especially new players. There's so much I want to do to fix it, but we don't have the volume of new players that really makes sense for me to dive into that right now. I've slapped a bunch of band-aids on it, like giving the starting factions all the simple constructs, upping starting ore, upping starting command. So at least people come in. If someone really wants to put the time in, it's going to be interesting for them. We also lost our wiki, so there's no, aside from them asking questions, they're going to be so lost. There's a couple of tutorials, but I don't know. The wikis really did a lot to guide new players, and those are dead and dusted. So I feel like a reset is a non-starter where we are right now. If you know,
Sorry, friends. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I feel like we've got a little bit of momentum here based on doing fixes and adding some of this new content, or what I've been calling in-game content. And I don't know why, like, we have a desire to try to ruin what's been a relatively good thing here. I mean, I think that there's an opportunity to fix lower hanging fruit / add new stuff here and there and keep people risking blowing the whole thing up for potentially marginal or negative result. I'm not saying that this isn't something worth discussing or doing at some but it seems like right now it would be a rather drastic thing to do, and it's become clear that, you know, doing some of these smaller tweaks here and there is getting people engaged and interested. I mean, we have more people in this voice chat than, you know, we're actively logged into the game for time. So I mean, I think that's being done currently working. Now, if it starts to not, then I think that you have a justification for more radical or wholesale change. But, you know, at the moment, it seems to me that what's being done from a feature set standpoint and a dev, you know, standpoint is regarded whether that's being voiced consciously or not.
Yeah. I caught most of that. Your mic was going in and out, but I think I got the general gist of what you're saying. And to build off of that, what I've noticed about games that have reset mechanics is that it really is, in my mind, a way of papering over a lack of depth in the game, because the people who design games, you want to make something that when somebody picks up that game and starts playing it, wow, it's exciting and there's all this stuff and it's new and it's engaging and man, you're really into it. And then you get like a month in, it's like, oh, all this stuff is old, it's boring, it was all surface level. Like once I started to kind of plumb into it and really dive into this game, there wasn't a lot there. And the game says, oh, wait, okay, I'll take it all away. It's all, we're going to give you that new player experience all over again. It's all fresh. You're starting over from scratch. And I think a lot of people fall for it. They go like, oh yeah, it's all new again. I don't have anything. This is exciting again. So I would really take it the other way. And that's, and, you know, in some ways I think that's to our detriment, but I think it also appeals to a certain kind of player. Like we're a niche game and I'm fine with that. Like we're a game that I think has really, really deep mechanics. And those, hopefully we can spend some time with the Internet Wayback Machine and pull up the wiki and move it over either to Reddit or to another online wiki site that will stick around and not be dependent on a crappy hosting company. But I want to go that way. I want to keep adding mechanics and depth, and just, you know, so there's always more and more and more there. And that was really the impulse for me when I created the Sha'Kahr Queen mechanic, is that it's that kind of, there's already so much that goes into leveling up a crew, and then we added merits. And now this is kind of like that last final piece is you've got that crew that you've spent so much time on and you've leveled them up and they've got just the merits you want. And now you go out and fight the queen and they get that last little piece that puts them over the line. That kind of depth really appeals to me.
Frizz, can you hear better?
Yeah.
Oh, that's way better.
Okay. So I think that what you just suggested there is exactly what I was trying to get at me earlier. I think that, you know, analogies and metaphors are not as useful as we sometimes make them out to be, but I think that there's been comparisons to, you know, the tabletop Warhammer in the past couple of weeks. And I know that my level of interest in Warhammer 40k would be greatly diminished if, after years of building up my army, Games Workshop came by my house and confiscated them all, and, you know, gave me a new starter pack and said, start over and paint these. I think that I would just say, well, screw this, I'm done. I don't think that my level of interest would increase, even if, you know, the new rule sets and new minis were quite compelling on their own.
Yeah, that's a really great example. I played a ton of Warhammer Epic, and just absolutely fell in love with that game. So a lot in when I was it didn't even really occur to me until recently is when I looked at the game and then thought back to kind of moving Eldar and Marine armies around in Epic. Was I was effectively building the game that I played when I was a kid, and that's what I was trying to do. And I always wanted battles that had more to them. Like, why are these armies fighting on the planet? Are there other risks that they're not taking into account? What about the local population? What's their impact on this battle? And getting down to, like, okay, who's the commander of this unit? What's he care about? Why do I want to, like, maybe sacrifice some units to try to keep him safe? I think those stories that we kind of build up and tell ourselves are part of what draw us and keep us playing games.
Oh, I definitely agree with Beth, and I agree with you, Frizz. I mean, you know, we are making a lot of headway. We're doing a lot of things, but I still think there, and I'm definitely on the side of if we do a reset on a lot of the things that as a commodities, as a thing that you built or won or whatever, any of that stuff, actions in general, if we took away factions or we took away structs or we took away shared slots, like I think that would kill the game. I 100% agree with whoever said that before. I think there is something to be, again, never talk about this again, or no, it's okay. I think there is room somewhere, and I don't know if it is faction points or if it's a new system or that gets retired or whatever. There is something to be said about the not just video games, right? It's professional sports. It's anything where they go and they start over new next year. It's anywhere, and everybody likes to have a chase. Everybody likes to have a goal, and everybody's goals are different, right? But we think as a community, there needs to be kind of that little top goal, and then there's always the secondary off the table affect people worldwide or take away commodities. That's what I'm trying.
Okay, so I think we're all in alignment. I want to quickly touch on. I think we can kind of then put this topic to bed. Like this idea of maybe not a faction point reset, but some kind of seasons that are built around faction points and somehow making that compelling in a race. So you're constantly adding to your faction point total, but there's maybe quarterly or whatever. You earn so many faction points. And then you're ranked against all other factions based on what you managed to do in your season, and that unlocks various rewards. And there's also a rank stacking on top of that. I think Destiny does that very well, and I really like the way they implemented it.
No,
I
think
it'd be really
that
cool to have like that built into somewhat of the story mode, but also keeping the faction points, because that's a very important thing for newer players, for us older players to more or less help them get kind of funded through getting all these faction point resources that.
Yeah, that's the tricky part. Is it's so hard to create a new faction because you're at such a deficit, and it's so hard to earn faction points. So that's probably a deeper discussion of other mechanics and about faction allies and something like that. And so maybe the race is by like faction alliance instead of by individual faction, and like the points earned are across the entire faction alliance. I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing here, but something that can allow people to make new factions and kind of level them up quickly and make it a fun way and make it a way that you engage with other factions at the same time.
Yeah, sorry, that was kind of what I wanted to get to, but couldn't get there. But yeah, I definitely think I've always liked the idea of having, an alliance consist of 10 to 15 smaller factions rather than two big factions at war. Because it creates a bit more strategy, and then the shared vision is like a small benefit when you're in the actual faction, but overall you're communicating as a cohesive alliance. But I think that's really good. I don't know. Do you think are we all in agreement that we like the idea of like a season, or do we think we should put it to a Reddit vote and then start hashing out what those rewards would be and stuff like that?
I think it's a lot of how it'll look like.
It's gonna be it's not. I mean, I when I say like a reset on faction points or whatever, what I mean by that is like maybe that system in general, it's not gonna be something we're gonna be figuring out now or a month from now. This is maybe. I mean, I'm saying a race is an answer. Maybe faction points don't even exist anymore after this discussion ever ends, whenever it does. But I think that's kind of where we need to go, is some kind of overall arching goal, but maybe faction points as a thing needs to be aired, but
Slayer
whatever.
Earlier is that we go down and we're fighting for bragging and salvage rights, and maybe for some people that is the case, but I mean, before self-salvage, the units lost just percentile wise due to overkill and failed salvages made army fighting unappealing. There's no reason to fight for 100, 200 units worth of salvage if I'm going to lose 10 to 20% anyways. I could have just saved the command in the ore and not deployed and saved the 4,000 command I spent to redeploy 6 times and built 4 times the amount of units I could have salvaged. So the fighting for salvage has not been an appealing factor to me. I fight for objectives. I want to fight for a node. I want to fight for the bragging right of I held my base. I held my location. I stood my ground. But without the compelling point of faction points or some reward system at the end, you're just smashing for faction points that mean nothing right now. I'm just holding a node to say I held my node, but I'm not actually winning anything at the end. I didn't gain anything of benefit, so I could have just spent my time on Ren getting another clone. I could have just done Shak on Aldus and got some mods. I could have just went to Kanu and got some relics rather than waste 5 to 10,000 command in units and drop costs. So that's where I think Dfenceking and some of the other players are, a seasonal or a rank system, some sort of competitive goal inside of a time range to where there's a reason to come down here and do this other than just smashing units at each other. Because I think for at least 10 to 20% of us, that's not a compelling factor.
Well, and I think the factions as it stands are really meaningful, but it's only really meaningful for the people who've been playing for 10 years. Having kind of the game, I don't know, maybe once I get your guys' take on all this, but like in my head, it's like if we have like a couple months of this PvE developing kind of grand finale, that could be a good point to transition the game to however we kind of collectively decide we want the game to take.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's not like something we should probably change this week. We shouldn't reset anything probably this week. It'll be a much broader thing. I think that's a new system, a new rework that needs to be thought out, talked about, and expanded upon over time. What should your rank system, your seasonal, your prestige awards be? How do we go about the resets? How often? Do we add more faction point methods? Do we add less faction point or remove methods of getting faction points? Do we make it bigger, lower? That's all stuff that needs to be discussed and gone over. That's like 2 or 3 code sessions worth of discussion and updates and tweaking, I think, before we actually do the reset. But I do think some sort of compelling factor to faction points and there being a rank system with rewards and, hey, this is why you're going to try and be number 1, or this is why you're going to try to get the most in this week, this month, this quarter, whatever.
Yep. Yeah, and then this all kind of, I think it gives DropShock that thing to chase that people want when they say they want to reset, but it does it without wiping everybody out and removing that compelling reason that causes people to log in and get excited and have these armies that they built years ago and now they're excited to play with them again.
Well, no, I don't think. I don't know if I kind of said it earlier. I don't think a hard reset is feasible for our community. I think it's the ideal solution for the end growth or a second instance of the game. If we're looking at actual growth, I think that's the only way to achieve it. But as far as maintaining the game, it's not a feasible reality.
Well, and also, I mean, DropShock is such a unique game. It's one of those rare ones where you could create a new account, log in, play a bit, get recruited to a faction, and depending on the faction, they could just give you an army if they want you to fight. And now suddenly you have resources comparable to someone who's been playing for years. So it's like unlike traditional MMOs where you have to like take a character through level 1, 2, 10, 40, 50, X. Like it's really more skill and communication and community based. And honestly, I prefer that. I think anything else is more artificial gating, and I like the organic nature of the game. I like the community that it brings out, and I think that's the reason we're all having this conversation 15 years later, is because, like, for whatever reason, I managed to stumble on a couple of things that really were compelling community aspects in the game, and here we all are still talking about it.
No, I agree. Everybody I've known that's stayed in the game has pretty well been brought in by somebody. A few of us kind of found the game organically. I stumbled across looking for something else, but I stayed because, I made a few bonds. Somebody helped me get started, helped me do this, helped me do that, and taught me the ropes, and that's what made it worthwhile and made it worth sticking around.
All right. I feel like we're about an hour 30 in, I've covered everything I wanted to talk to. Feel like this is winding down. Any parting shots? Anybody have anything they absolutely want to get off their chest as we wrap up this code?
Does the DWA damage work for Shak?
Did I miss it, or did we still haven't went over the self-salvage repair cost?
Okay, so XHunter, let me touch on that, and then we'll go to that point next. All right. So the DW, sorry, there were two people at once. Can you re-ask your question?
The DWA's damage reduction, does that apply? Does it work against Shak, or is it set into a separate field?
So, you mean like the Shak ability to ignore damage reduction?
Yes.
So it should be like the Behemoth separate, but let me confirm that for you.
And another suggestion while you're doing that, allow Bandit Overload mechas to be activated with an BE, but its only effect is it takes its Bandit effect to a Sha'Kahr effect. It does plus 10 damage to Sha'Kahr.
What's the feeling on that second one? Well, I'm looking for this code. Let me get some feedback on that second idea for the BOM.
I mean, personally, I would like it to be a BP unit. So yeah, go for it. If we're not going to make it ununique, let's make it.
It is non-unique.
Some overpowered. It isn't. It's not unique anymore. I thought it was.
Nope, that got changed a week and a half ago or so. But I think you can drop all of them as long as you got a BP crew. You can activate a bomb with an eye, and it does plus 10 damage to Shak.
Will that
Fine with
be
me.
unique
That's a
once
lot of
activated?
damage. This thing has a lot of guns, PK. You may want.
Yeah, but all of its guns are really
Can't really
low damage.
focus.
This is true.
Okay, so the DWA is in the code block. So when I set out the weapon types, I also set out a all weapon type effectively. So behemoths are not affected by it because their effect is separate. The Death Whisperer though is in the same code block. There was a special damage type that's all damage types, and that's how the Death Whisperer. So the Death Whisperer is going to be affected by the Sha'Kahr attacks that ignore damage reduction, whereas the behemoths are not.
Okay.
That's a little confusing, so I think we'll want to shift both of those together, but I don't know which way we want to take it yet. Why don't we see? I'm not going to touch it, and we'll see how it plays out. And if behemoths are just absolutely ridiculous, then I'm going to make the behemoths like the DWAs. If behemoths are actually pretty workable, and the only thing about the DWAs is their effect is permanent, whereas behemoths, you have to activate them 4 times and then you're out of luck until you get another charge. So I'm just not going to touch it right now because I feel like that's kind of balanced, but we can see how it works and come back to it at a future code jam. XHunter, you had a question next about repair costs?
Yeah, that was brought up at the beginning, and I don't think it was addressed at all.
Okay. I saw a couple questions about that, and I've actually been thinking about it. I set it, and then I raised it, and I'm kind of compelled to leave it, at least for the time being. The reason I want it higher is I still want a bit of a sting. If you lose a unit, I don't think it'd just be like, oh, I pay this nominal ore fee, and the cost to me is really just the clicking on this damaged status. The reason I want it higher is I don't want to kill the market for constructed units. My worry is if self-salvage is too cheap, then people who enjoy building in the game won't have a market of new players because most players are self-salvaging their units. I think it's more a cost decision you have to weigh when a unit is damaged. You have to ask yourself, is it cheaper for me to rebuild this unit? And do I want to go through the hassle of rebuilding this unit, or do I just want to take the easy way out and just click on the repair button? When you have a unit that's double integrated, obviously, you're going to pay that cost because it's way cheaper than. So that's really why I did it. I want that repair cost higher because I want to create a line mentally for you where there's some units that you're just rebuilding. And that way we've got that churn and we don't kill the constructor market. And we've got some high tier units that are in a way protected, and you get those back. So I want it balanced. Does that make sense?
My only issue with that is that for the cases where you can recover the unit, that's actually a penalty, because if it's too high, you kind of just prefer it didn't self-salvage at all.
Well, yeah. But yeah, what he's saying is if it self-salvages and the ore cost is almost more than it would be to rebuild the whole unit, then you could have just salvaged it yourself for 5 command.
And in some cases, it's double the unit cost, so it's not even worth repairing them. I just scrap them, or I don't even know.
Yeah, that's
maybe
a lot of mechanics. Honestly, I'm okay with that because it gives another piece. So that just means there are some units where you aren't going to put self-salvage mods on them, and if they self-salvage, oops, like you'd really prefer it didn't do that, but it did it. So,
But then there's the flat line and the commander, and then there's some cases where you just have the crew that just happen to have self-salvage on them, so you kind of end up in a situation where you really don't want it to happen, but you have no way to control to not let it.
Like, I've been throwing leopards at your Shak on Aldus for the past couple cycles, just suiciding him, killing the queen, and leaving. And it's not. I have a horde of self-salvaged leopards that I didn't want to self-salvage, and it's not economical for me to actually repair them. So now they just kind of.
well, you can always you can scrap them. So, yeah.
Speaking of like quality of life and self-salvage, though, on the army viewer screen, would it be too difficult to get a tab for destroyed units so you can click that and repair them out of there rather than having to open up each tree in your refit army?
It's the code right now is just in modify units. At some point, I could also compartmentalize that code and then put it in different places. Yeah, let's maybe make a Reddit post and we can track it. And once a lot of these structural issues are dealt with, I can do like a quality of life pass and kind of get some of this other stuff.
Will do.
All right. Any other parting shots?
I do have a couple. Not a couple, but two. Specifically.
Did that go silent for anybody but me?
I think you cut out there. Salvaging units on Kanu?
Hello?
Oh, that's already in the game. If you pull up a unit's info, in its panel, one of your units will say in communication with the kill raw.
I get what you're saying. I think he wants it on the actual like sidebar where you see commands shown as like, so if I have move out issued on a unit, if I hit the like general overview tab of all my units, it shows that like that unit has move out casted on it. I think what he wants is a icon added on that to say that there is a signal on it, just to make it a little more easier to see. Because right now, yeah, you can status all the units, but it does take quite a while.
Okay. Yeah. Unfortunately, because the map code is in pieces, I really can't do anything to it right now. But it's in pieces because I'm trying to turn it from an unworkable, unchangeable mess to something that I can actually build off of. Because I really feel like the map viewer is the heart of the game, and right now, or the way it was when I picked it up, I couldn't. You can't add features to it. I can't believe I wrote that thing in TextPad actually. Like no IDE, no nothing. I don't know how. It's not a buggy mess that just absolutely fell over. But the problem is untangling all of that is a massive effort.
So, anybody opposed to the activating bombs and using BP crews to allow them to do plus 10 damage to Shak?
Um, my only suggestion would be that maybe it's not 10. Maybe I'm crazy, but
I mean, the base weapons on the bomb are really, really low just because they have the bandit damage modifier, which I played with
yeah, I'm aware.
this week, and the bandit modifier still doesn't make them anywhere near as good as just dropping a Gatling in their blades. And their high CE makes them nearly useless. I tried this week running around a few different setups, and bombs just really don't have much use.
I quite like it in terms of finding a use, but just so we're aware, that will be a non-unique activated unit, which will be the first one we've ever had in the game. So that'll be a unique thing. So just to confirm, so we'd use a Bandit's Eye on a non-commander mecha effectively, or we'd make it a commander mecha, but it would you could.
It would only be you'd have to use a BP crew on it at that point if it's activated with the BE, but it becomes like its own special thing since it's the Bandit Overlord activating with an eye allows the BP crew to use it in that aspect.
I think one thing that would be a nice side effect is that it would provide a use for all of these excess BP crews we've been piling up.
And it's a dump for Bandit Eye, so.
Yeah.
I think it's good. It just opens up us having non-unique activated units, which maybe we can do. This might be a new tier of less powerful used units.
Could be something.
I think it's not.
No. No, that's dumb.
Could we potentially look? Because Leth, your thoughts on it being +10 being too much. Shak has a pretty high minus to hit on armor. I mean, I'd be happy with 10 and then reviewing it, or either going 5 and reviewing it. But I definitely think it's a cool addition. It's a useless unit at the moment, and there's as you say, a use for BP and Bandit Eyes. So I think it's cool.
Yeah, I already backed down on that.
It sounds like why don't we make a Reddit thread on it and throw our ideas there, and then we can bring it up at the next code jam and kind of curate it and pull out the ones we really like. Because I like where this is going, but as it was pointed out, this is going to be an activated non-unique unit, so there's code changes there. This isn't a low lift, but I think if we can. Let's put it out there. Let's do a week, and if we get some really great ideas, then it's something that I'd be willing to invest some time doing the code for.
And I was going to ask Frizz too. I mean, is this even possible? Because obviously, if we make them activated units, and they have the plus, I mean, you got to make those all ununique, and you got to be able to deploy many activated units at one time. Is that even possible with normal BP crews and not commanders?
I think I flag the unit and write backing code. It shouldn't be a huge issue. When you deploy, there's this huge check and recheck it does to confirm that you're not breaking any game rules and that everything is where it's supposed to be, and it does a lot of sanity checking too. So there'll just be some exceptions around that sanity checking. So yeah, let's Reddit post and throw our ideas at that.
Frizz, can you shoot me your agenda after we get done, and then I'll take the notes that PK and I put together and combine that into the update post?
You got it. Yeah, mine's pretty terse. I'll try to add a little bit of context to it, but it's got the broad stroke.
Fine. Mainly just for a sanity check, just to make sure that we didn't miss anything.
Well, I literally typed out these entire code jams, so I have a full transcription damn near, other than the last 30 minutes of just idle chit chat.
Oh, Dale, would that work better, or do you want my?
That's fine. If that saves you work, I'll just work off of what PK has and combine it with mine.
Okay, it's a copy paste for me, so I'll just send this over as well.
Cool.
No, dog, you're done.
I never heard it.
All right, we'll give Dog the last question. Okay, you got man.
I had two small questions, if possible. First one, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on Mortum. I know we've been kind of juggling around. I just want to hear what your thoughts are on re-enabling it or why it went away, because it was a pretty active planet at first, and you don't have to go in super detail.
So Mortum was basically windowed PvP with tiny buck rewards. Is that we're talking about?
Why it went away? Because I believe it was the most active of the planets that went away.
Honestly, it was I think when I turned off planets, I was just looking at that moment, and there was nobody on Mortum, and there were people on Hades. So it was like, well, if I turn off, the problem is if I turn off a planet with people on it, they get stuck on that planet. So that was really the reason behind it. If I'm happy to do a quick show of hands here, because I don't think anyone's really doing anything on Hades. Do we want to swap Hades for Mortum?
Yes.
I mean, I would rather have Mortum than Hades.
Mortem at least gives us something to fight over, an objective, which we kind of don't have right now.
I still want windowed PvP for Dominus, damn it.
Well, that's the long-term goal, and actually this conversation really helped enlighten me in that regard. Is like I've been saying, Rin. I feel like we got a good small unit planet, and we get that one. I got right 8 years ago somehow. So, Kanu is sort of a mid-army planet with a lot of interesting encounters there. Aldus now has become this kind of really interesting PvE planet where you can do Shak raids. But solving large army battles and making those compelling, there's a lot of mechanics and pieces that need to come together to make that work. And I think like we talked about today with faction seasons, that seeing that I think is kind of a final piece that's going to make whatever Dominus ends up being a real driver for large army conflicts there. But that's why it's the last thing, is because I think everything else is leading up to that. Having a real PvE solve of Aldus and having the game able to adjust based on the amount of CE there is an absolute lever I need for large army battles, because otherwise I want some kind of really cool, or actually multiple really cool PvE encounters on Dominus or whatever the large army planet is. But to do that, I needed a planet like Aldus first, where I figured out how I needed, so that the game could adjust to the size of the armies on the planet. Does that make sense?
No, I agree. Dominus as the faction conquest planet would be the ideal planet for our seasonal prestige, whatever system, blah blah blah. So, no, I agree.
All right. So if nobody is, which planet's ugly? Oh, Aldus?
No, the Dominus non-PvP hours currently. I do like Hyde's mention though of, and it's something I mentioned when I was talking about a planet rework when the game first started, is making a planet where all the faction flags are put into one pool instead. So like on deployment for this thing, your faction becomes resistance or anti-Sha'Kahr or kill raw, whatever, so that we all share vision and we all share commands. We can help each other. We can share the salvage. There's not any of the this person can't salvage this one. Did I kill this Shak, or did he kill this Shak? Who killed what? We can all actually just work together. I like that idea. I think it'd be a cool adjustment for all this.
I have my only potential counter thought to that would be it doesn't stop anyone for any reason of their own volition jumping down and stealing salvage. And I've had that be done to me. Not recently, but in the past. So maybe it's PTSD, but people could cheese you pretty well. And I don't like that idea, because that could just be a really good rib shot.
In the same aspect, though, 2 or 3 people from another faction can drop down SEs and trigger a bunch of Shak to come run in your direction too. So
I feel like people are more apt to try to steal your salvage than drop SEs to just mess with you. That's just my personal opinion, though. Like I've seen.
I love everybody here, but we're all pretty toxic. We're not we're not ready to be buddy and have. There's a reason why we came up in chat the other day, like, oh, we made this random rule so people didn't steal salvage. We're all not to be trusted enough to be friends yet. So we all love each other, but we're like family. We're not. Yeah. So let's. Great idea, but later.
So before we hit 2 hours, and I think I'm going to have a hard stop at that point, the revival of Mortum, do we want 45-second turns or 1-minute turns?
1 minute.
Good Lord, please 1 minute.
Yeah, 1 minute.
We got it, 1 minute. All right, Hades is going away. Mortum should be back shortly.
Did you say 90 seconds? I think he said 90 seconds. I had 90 seconds.
I mean, I would be opposed to 90 seconds. I would not vote against it.
let's start it at a minute. The cool part is with this new variable time turn code, I can easily do 90 minutes. I can do 5 minutes. I can do 1 hour turn.
Please not 90 minutes.
Oh my god.
Yeah, sorry, 90 was a joke. 60's fine. 60's fun.
Okay, you got it. We'll do 1 minute turns. I'm just waiting for Hades to set, and I'm going to bring Mortum up, and I'm going to check the PvP window code just to make sure that's running.
Question before we get too crazy here, and after we get rid of Hades forever, because and I'm not going to go into small factions because we don't care about faction points, but this totally kills faction headquarter buildings. I mean, I know that's a small side note, but just for maybe Reddit for next time, since we're not going to be having that planet anymore, we should probably do something with that. Just
yes, I agree. Let's come up with a Reddit thread for a bunch of suggestions of how they can be useful on Mortum.
Yeah, or just as a general building, but just to throw that out there, because that building only has one purpose, and now that building purpose is going to be gone.
I like that. Also, I need some Shak bases to kill. I'm running out of Vanguards over time here, so maybe we could introduce some Shak bases to Mortum.
Stop dying. Get better.
What about replacing the bandit nodes with just Shak bases for now?
Oh dear Jesus.
To be fair, human tech's pretty useless in terms of buildings, apart from fusion reactors. So I wouldn't be is it an XML feed similar to the other generated bases where it's just there's 6 set designs for Frizz. So maybe we could submit some or on our base designer and do some screenshots, or you can just throw it all together.
I like it. Yeah. Shak bases instead of bandit bases. Fuck yeah.
Or at least definitely 50% of it being Shak buildings. Or is it more that we need to look at human tech and Shak is actually meant to be a little bit more rare and you add it and trickle it in the base versus completely using it? Maybe a conversation not an hour and 52 minutes in, but
yeah, I think we're at next code jam. Rob, you said you had one more small question.
Yeah, I did. I was just wondering if it was possible to make the killer mods their own unique CE modifier, the same as simple, just because it kind of screws over intermediate and simple killer units. Like a Wolfhound is 1,000-bit CE with 0 mods on it.
I +1 that. I like that we added the CE modifiers, but I think their complexity should be kill raw complexity so that they are on their own field and don't have penalties.
Sorry, I was doing the final tweaks for Mortum. Can you run that by me again?
So changing the Killra CE, like just the category that they are, into their own unique thing that has the same modifier as simple. So they still have that 1.25, but they don't screw over intermediate and simple units because they're technically elite mod. So like Wolfie is 1,000 CEs or 1,000 CE just with no mods on it now because it's got those 1.25s on them with crazy modifiers because they're elite mods.
Yeah, +1 the complexity kill raw.
Well, or I could just and it would be simple behind the hood. I could just make it simple as a quick patch. The thing is, there's those units are already so powerful. My worry is opening up those CEs. They are on the OP scale, and so you're basically dropping them because you want to drop something that the unit is overpowered, and you kind of want to just have fun with it. I think we need to do something down the road, but if I make that blanket change, I go from having to deal with like 1 or 2 units to now suddenly every single 2 unit is now a problem, and I have to like balance them all at once. So yes, somewhere down the road, I want to address that, but where it's at right now is more reasonable for me because I can deal with them a little more slowly, like the changes to the BA1. So if I have to do it en masse, some are just going to get absolutely nerfed into the ground, and that's not going to be fun for anybody.
I don't think any of the simple or intermediate units are in range of being abused. Like you look at the Python versus the Asp, and even at the same CE level, the Asp is just better in every way.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think there's any way to really make any of the simple units stronger than how the advanced units are currently.
You're putting up a like basically like do it now type of situation for somebody's mind. So and you say that and somebody will do it, and it's just how it works. Eventually, I just yeah.
So are the Mort nodes going to be Shak bases? Or no?
Cross his fingers.
I just don't want to drop now, and then in like 20 minutes, it gets cycled.
That was actually my suggestion, Kirby, was that we convert it to a kind of King of the Hill style. But down the road, maybe another planet, another idea.
All right. Mortum's in, and it's in sync with Dominus. The whatever code is there, I'm just going to leave there. The Shak base spawning and the swarm spawning is all disabled right now, just because I made changes to that code, and it eventually got fixed, but it hit the problem of the PVE issues that I've always had in the past. So I didn't feel compelled to reactivate it. Now with the logging and kind of seeing how well personally feeling like PVE is working really well on Aldus. I just need to take that logic and build it into both Shak bases and Bandit Swarm. That kind of those responsive mechanics, and then I'll feel comfortable building that back into a planet.
So the code for generating the Shak base can't just be like copied over to the Bandit base, or the designs that the Bandit base from can't just pick from the designs of the Shak base.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Shak base spawning code, I put it in the AI logic. It lives completely separate from the regular turn logic that generates bandits and bandit bases and things like that.
Okay, I just curious how that was functioning.
Yeah, and I think it was kind of a load issue when it first came out. The old server that we were on, when it tried to generate a Shak base and run the turn, it basically fell over. So it got moved to the AI code as a load balancing feature. But yeah, that'll need to be consolidated at some point. And I have on my to-do list to do an entire pass on the spawn code anyway. And once I've got that, then yeah, absolutely, we can spawn little mini Shak bases, cool bandit bases, all of that opens up. But my to-do list is enormous for this, but it's exciting because the top items just add I think really cool and compelling things to the game. And there's also neat little one-offs like just putting Aldus back on and building up a Shak Queen AI and suddenly seeing how cool that is. So no, I'm excited. I have that like 2008 feeling right now, and I'm running with it.
No, I'm super grateful here. I think everything's great. And I hope anything that I say that, I think we should do this or that, I don't want to take away from anything you're doing or make it seem like I'm not appreciative or that I haven't enjoyed things. I think, especially this week, it's been a great update. I like the slight changeover to the UI where things are a darker blue and not quite as rough around the edges. I like the whole feel of things and the way we're heading.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll wrap on that. I always say end on a high note. Thank you, everyone, for attending the Code Jam. I've been having a blast at these. I hope you have too. We've got some great ideas for next week. Looking forward to the next one.